reading that. I know that it's tough when you got all those names in there, but you did just fine. I pray that the words of my mouth and the meditation of each and every one of our hearts here today will please God, who is our rock and our Redeemer. Have you ever felt that God was prompting you to do something for which you were inadequate? Something that was beyond your abilities? Maybe it's something that you didn't feel like you had the gifts to accomplish. Maybe you didn't feel like you had the stamina or the time or the resources to accomplish that which you had planned for your life. Or maybe you weren't smart enough. Or maybe you felt like you just didn't have enough faith to follow through. Maybe you didn't have what it needed to accomplish God's purpose or God's aim, God's mission. But sometimes in life, God calls us to do the things that we are incapable of doing so that He can empower us to accomplish it in us and accomplish things that we never dreamt were possible. In our passage today, God has called Solomon to construct a temple. Now, God has said that He will live in this temple and this temple alone. Solomon is to build an earthly dwelling for a heavenly being. God said that He would not live anywhere else and that Solomon alone must build it, David's son. There will be no other place on earth where God's presence will be so keenly felt. Now realize for almost 500 years, God has traveled around with His people in a tent. And now, God says, build me a house. Solomon is Israel's third king, David's son, and he is the one that God chose throughout all of history to build him a house. Now think about who Solomon is. Solomon's a brand new king, just taken to the throne, barely even solidified his rule and his authority. He doesn't have any experience ruling a nation. He's pretty young. He doesn't have any experience administrating things. And God says, in addition to learning how to rule this kingdom that I have placed you in charge of, I want you to build me a glorious place where people can come and worship my name. A place that people will recognize that I live in it. So besides ruling a kingdom, He's got this colossal task at hand. It's a task that nobody on earth has ever done before. How is Solomon going to build a temple? Where is he going to find the skills he needs to construct, design and construct? Where is he going to find the people with the skills? None of the Israelites has ever built a temple before. Where is he going to find the raw materials needed to construct such an edifice? Solomon doesn't have what it takes to build a home for the God of the universe. But that's exactly what God calls him to do. Sometimes God calls people to a mission or a task for which they are inadequate. Solomon felt inadequate to serve God as His chosen king, and he was inadequate to build God a temple. Is God calling you to do something for which you are inadequate? Think about it. Is God calling you to something that you might not be able to do? I mean, maybe He's calling you to start a ministry, a new ministry here at the church. Pretty intimidating. A men's group? Maybe to open up your home for a study group. Or maybe God is calling you to organize a mission trip. Or maybe God is calling you to build a new ministry facility. Things that we are incapable of doing. Or maybe God is calling you to evangelism, right? You're getting clammy feet, clammy hands, your palms starting to sweat. God is calling you to evangelism, perhaps. Somebody specific in your family, friends, acquaintances. Or maybe to a lifestyle of evangelism. I wonder, is God calling you to financial generosity? Supporting a specific missionary or a specific charity? I mean, certainly God is calling us to tithe. I mean, that's a commandment, along with the other commandments. Just 10%. And if we're not doing that, that is truly something God is calling us to do. Or maybe God is calling you to simplify your lifestyle. You've got too many possessions, too many commitments, or too many jobs, or too many toys, and they're distracting you from that which is truly important, your relationship with Him, your relationship with your friends and family. Maybe God is calling somebody here to full-time ministry as a missionary in a foreign culture, or as a pastor right here in the U.S. Could God be calling you to greater involvement here at the church in any number of ways beyond Sunday morning worship? Either in a leadership position or in a participatory, a supporting role. In Sunday school, Wednesday evening services, singing in the choir, helping with the sound, women's association, counting money after church, helping with one of the committees that serves the church, the fundraising committee, trustees, the session, the building committee. Maybe as I'm going through this, you're sitting here thinking, I'm unable to do that thing which God is prompting me to do. I feel that God is pushing me to do something, but I don't feel like I'm able to do it. Sometimes God calls people to accomplish a mission or perform a task for which they are inadequate. And when God does call people to accomplish these things that are beyond their abilities, what should our first response be? To fall on our knees. To fall on our knees in prayer. Solomon asks God for wisdom. God says, you can have anything you want. Solomon says, God, I'm going to need your wisdom. You want me to rule this people? I am going to need that wisdom to rule them wisely, justly, equitably, fairly. When Solomon realized that he was in over his head, he called on God to fulfill in him that which was lacking. And God answered his prayer. Prayer, when God calls us to accomplish things that are beyond our abilities, we should turn to prayer. Prayer helps us to know whether the call is from God or a personal desire, just an inkling, or a passing fancy. We pray, God, reveal to us your will. Is this really what you're calling me to do? And He will clarify. Prayer also reminds us where the power and the abilities will ultimately come from. Not here. There. Prayer keeps us close to Him who loves us best. Prayer is essential when God is calling us to accomplish things that are beyond our abilities. And then, when we have prayed, God will endow His chosen instruments with everything that they need to accomplish the mission that is beyond their abilities. Consider Solomon. Solomon was inadequate for the purposes to which God had called him. And yet God gave Solomon wisdom, as he had asked, in many respects. God gave Solomon wisdom in judicial matters. Remember the prostitutes who were fighting over the baby? I mean, I would have never thought to call for a sword and tell him we'll divide that baby in half. That's gruesome. But Solomon had the judicial wisdom, the insight into the personality and the skills and the mindset of the women to know that this would reveal the truth of who the mother was. He gave him judicial wisdom. He also gave him administrative wisdom. In the next chapter, this chapter 3, just before our passage, chapter 3 was the prostitutes. Chapter 4, he gives Solomon administrative wisdom. Solomon, as he takes hold of the reins of a new kingdom, says, man, this is way too complex to rule all these things. I can't be in charge of every little thing all over. And he divides the kingdom into 12 areas and puts governors over each of the districts so that he can rule the governors and the governors can rule the areas. He administratively, God has given Solomon administrative wisdom to rule a kingdom. God has answered Solomon's prayer by giving him wisdom in intellect. Also in chapter 4, we're going to see that Solomon had divine insight into the fields of botany, biology, animal husbandry, metallurgy, economics, geography, trade and commerce, and philosophy. He became famous around the world. People came and sought his knowledge, his intellectual knowledge. because God had given him wisdom in matters of intellect. But finally, we come to our passage today where God gives Solomon wisdom in the area of politics. God gave Solomon wisdom in political matters. He was able to establish a treaty with Hiram, who was the king of the province just north of Israel. By establishing this treaty, Solomon assured peace on his northern border. He didn't have to set up an army to defend himself. And not only did he establish peace, that he didn't have to worry about an invading army from the north, but he also, by this treaty, got the raw materials needed to construct the temple. Because Hiram was in charge of an area that was filled with trees that Solomon needed to build his temple for God. So, Solomon used the divinely given wisdom to establish a treaty and provide the raw materials to build the temple. But not only the raw materials, the knowledge, the know-how. Remember, the Israelites had never built a temple, and they weren't skilled laborers with the use of the wood and the stone. And so, he got skilled labor as well as a part of this treaty. God gave Solomon the skills that he needed to accomplish God's mission in Solomon's life. And God, if he is calling us to a purpose that is beyond our ability, he can and is eager to give us the skills that we need to accomplish his mission in our lives. If God is calling you to radically simplify your lifestyle so that you can focus on the things that are truly important, he is going to give you the strength to give up your Xbox. He is going to give you the strength to go without that extra pair of shoes. He's going to give you what you need to accomplish that mission. If he's calling you to radically simplify your life, those things that seem so important, when you give them up, God will give you the strength to make it through. If God is calling you to be a generous and fearless giver, God will make sure that you have every need supplied. You will not go hungry, and you will not go homeless. And you'll be surprised and amazed at how easily God is able to meet those needs and supply them. If God is calling you to start a home study group, your house is going to be clean enough for them to come. And God will provide people with enough insight and wisdom to make those discussions not only interesting, but life-changing. God will provide for those needs. If God is calling you to give up your career and travel to a foreign country, you see the barriers and the obstacles. But God will give you everything you need to overcome whatever barriers, whatever obstacles stand in your way. And they will melt away like a wall of little sugar cubes that water just pours over, and it will dissolve out of your way. God will meet the needs and will fulfill in you every skill and every strength that you need to accomplish his purposes in your life. When God calls people to impossible missions, he grants them special powers, abilities, knowledge, and faith needed to accomplish those purposes. But God will only endow people with the necessary abilities if they trust him enough to take the first. Solomon accepted God's call to be king. He was young. He was inexperienced. He accepted this call, and he started to rule as king. And then in chapter 3, God came and said, I'm going to give you something. What do you want? And Solomon said, hey, God, I'm here. I'm following your will, but I'm not adequate to do this job. I'm going to need wisdom. Solomon asked for wisdom only after he took the first step in obeying God's call on his life. Think about it. God is calling Solomon to rule. Solomon says to God, okay, God, I'll rule if you give me wisdom. And I'm going to wait right here